The nurse didn't say it loudly. She didn't make a scene. She didn't even look at me when she asked the question. She kept her eyes on the consent form, pen poised, voice low and practiced like she'd said the same line 1,000 times. "I just need your husband's signature," she said, "or his wife's consent on file." I leaned forward, still in my coat, my purse strap cutting into my shoulder, and said, "I'm his wife. He can't sign right now, he's sedated." The nurse's pen stopped midair. She looked at the chart again. Then she looked up at me for the first time, and her face changed in a way I'll never forget. Not confusion, not sympathy, recognition, like she had just realized she was about to hand me the wrong life. She leaned closer, and in a whisper that felt like a warning, she said, "Ma'am, you're not his wife." My stomach dropped so hard it felt like the floor moved, because we'd been married 12 years. I had the photos, the ring, the last name. I had the mortgage. I had the kid's birth certificate with his name on it. I had the hospital bracelet from his last surgery still tucked in my bathroom drawer. And yet here was a nurse in a fluorescent hallway telling me the system had someone else as his wife, and the chart was already locked. My name is Nadia Ellis. I'm 36 years old, and the day my husband almost died was the day I found out someone had been quietly erasing me while I was still showing up every morning and calling it love. It started the night before, with a phone call that felt ordinary until it didn't. Grant, my husband, was on a short trip for work. He traveled a lot. Sales conferences, client dinners, last-minute meetings in cities that blurred together because he always came back with the same hotel soap smell and the same tired smile and the same, "I'm doing it for us." That night he called at 10:18 p.m. and said he had a headache. His voice sounded thick, like he was fighting to sound normal. "Probably just the flight," he said. I told him to take water and sleep. He laughed softly and said, "You worry too much." Then the line went quiet. I thought he'd hung up. Then I heard a sound like something hitting carpet, and the call stayed connected. I said his name twice. No answer. I sat up in bed, heart already sprinting, and called again, straight to voicemail. I called the hotel. I gave his room number. The front desk put me on hold too long. When the clerk came back, his voice was different. "Ma'am," he said, "we've called security. Please stay on the line." I remember staring at my own bedroom wall while I listened to muffled voices on the other end, the hotel's version of chaos, then someone saying, "Sir? Sir, can you hear me?" Then the clerk came back and said, "Paramedics are here." My mouth went dry. "Is he conscious?" I asked. The clerk hesitated just long enough to turn my blood cold. "He's breathing," he said. "They're taking him now." 30 minutes later, I was driving with one hand on the wheel and the other calling airlines to find a red-eye, calling my sister to come stay with my son, calling the hospital the clerk finally gave me, listening to a receptionist say, "We don't have that name yet," then say, "Wait, yes, we do. He's in imaging." When I landed at dawn, my body felt like it belonged to someone else. I drove straight from the airport to the medical center without going home, without brushing my teeth, without changing out of yesterday's clothes, because none of that felt like it mattered if Grant's brain was swelling and I was the only person who could say what medications he was allergic to. The ER smelled like disinfectant and coffee that had been reheated too many times. I ran to the desk and gave his name. The clerk looked at the screen and said, "Family?" "Wife," I said automatically, the way you say it like a key. She nodded and printed a visitor band, then pointed me toward the trauma waiting room. I sat for maybe 7 minutes before a doctor came out, tall, calm, the kind of calm that means someone else is doing the panicking for him behind closed doors. "Mrs. Ellis?" he asked, and I stood too fast. "He had a hemorrhagic stroke," he said. "We stabilized him, but he needs an emergency procedure to relieve pressure." My throat tightened. "Can I see him?" "Briefly," he said, "but we need consent." "Consent?" I repeated. The doctor nodded. "He's not able to sign. We need his spouse." I felt relief for 1 second. Relief that I was useful, that I had a job to do besides fall apart. They walked me to a smaller hallway outside a procedure area. A nurse met us with a clipboard. She was brisk but not unkind. "Name and date of birth," she said, then flipped to the consent page. "I just need your husband's signature," she said, "or his wife's consent on file." I didn't hesitate. "I'm his wife." That was when her pen stopped. That was when she looked at the chart and then at me, and then back at the chart like she expected the paper to correct itself. Then she leaned toward me and whispered, "Ma'am, you're not his wife." For 1 second, I couldn't breathe. "What did you just say?" I asked, and my voice came out too quiet. The nurse didn't answer me directly. She angled the clipboard away from my eyes like it was suddenly dangerous information. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "but the chart lists a different spouse." My ears rang. "No," I said. "That's not possible. We've been married 12 years. The nurse's eyes flicked toward the doctor, then back to me. "Do you have identification?" she asked. "Yes!" I snapped, and I fumbled for my wallet so hard my cards spilled onto the floor. I thrust my driver's license at her. It said N. Ellis. It matched the name I'd been living as for over a decade. She glanced at it, but it didn't change her expression. "I believe you," she said, and that sentence somehow made it worse. Believe you meant she still couldn't act. Believe you meant the system disagreed loudly enough to override a human being. The doctor stepped in. "What's going on?" he asked, and the nurse lowered her voice even further. "His spouse on file isn't her," she said. The doctor's jaw tightened. He looked at me. "Mrs. Nadia," he corrected himself. "We need to verify. This is a consent issue." "Verify what?" I said, heat rising in my chest. "I'm his wife." The nurse swallowed once. "The spouse on file is registered as—" She hesitated, then said the name like it tasted wrong. "Caroline Ellis." Caroline. My whole body went cold, because I knew that name. Not from Grant's mouth, not from family, not from friends. I knew it from a Christmas card that had arrived at our house 2 years earlier, addressed to Grant and Caroline, with a return address I didn't recognize. Grant had laughed when I showed him. "Old contact list," he'd said. "Probably a mistake." I had believed him because the alternative was exhausting. I had known the name from a voicemail I once heard on his phone when he thought I wasn't listening. "Call me back, Caro," a woman's voice had said, casual and intimate. Grant had shrugged it off. "Work client," he'd said. "She calls everyone nicknames." I had believed him because the alternative was humiliating. Now the alternative was standing in a hospital corridor while my husband's life depended on consent, and the system was telling me someone else had the legal right to say yes. "Where is she?" I asked. The nurse glanced at the monitor station. "It looks like she's been contacted," she said carefully. "Contacted by who?" I demanded. "Our registration team," the nurse replied. "When he came in, the emergency contact and spouse on file were called." I felt my mouth go dry. They hadn't called me first. They had called her. The doctor spoke again, firm now. "We can proceed with 2-physician emergency consent if necessary," he said, "but it's slower and we prefer next of kin." Slower. My stomach twisted. "Call the social worker," the nurse said to someone behind her, and then to me she said, "Ma'am, do you have a marriage certificate?" I stared at her. "Not on me," I said. "Who carries that?" The nurse didn't argue. She looked almost apologetic. "If the chart is indicating another legal spouse, we need documentation." I pulled my phone out with shaking hands and called my sister first, not because she could fix it, but because I needed someone to hear my voice so I didn't float away. "Nadia?" she answered, groggy. "They're saying I'm not his wife," I said. There was a pause long enough for my sister to wake up fully. "What do you mean?" "They have someone else," I whispered. "Caroline?" My sister cursed softly. "Okay," she said, voice turning sharp. "What do you need?" "Go to my safe," I said. "Top closet shelf, the black lockbox. The certificate is there. Take a photo and send it." "I'm on it," she said. I hung up and turned back to the nurse. "Please," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "He needs this procedure now." The nurse nodded once. "I know," she said, and she didn't sound bureaucratic. She sounded genuinely unsettled, like she had seen family lies before and hated them every time. They moved Grant past us on a gurney then, wheeling him toward the procedure room. His face was pale, his eyes half open but unfocused, a bandage on his head from where they'd placed monitoring leads. I stepped toward him instinctively. "Grant," I said. His gaze drifted toward my voice, and for 1 second his eyes seemed to lock onto mine like a thread catching. His lips moved slightly. I leaned in, and he whispered, barely audible, "Don't let her." Then his eyes rolled away and the gurney kept moving. I went numb. Don't let her. Not don't leave, not I love you, don't let her. The nurse touched my elbow gently. "Ma'am," she said, "we need to move you back to the waiting area." I didn't move. "Who is Caroline?" I asked, and my voice came out flat. The nurse's face tightened. "I can't share patient information," she said, but her eyes said something else. "I already know she's coming." The social worker arrived. Heather, badge, calm voice. She guided me into a small consultation room, offered water I couldn't drink, and asked for my ID again, then asked for any proof of marriage. I kept repeating, "We're married," like repetition could become evidence. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. A photo from my sister, the marriage certificate, official seal, our names, Grant Ellis and Nadia Lane, my maiden name, date, county, signature. I shoved the phone toward Heather. "There," I said. Heather's face changed slightly when she saw it. "Okay," she said. "That is helpful." Helpful, not decisive. "Why would the hospital list someone else?" I asked. Heather didn't answer immediately. She chose her words carefully. "Sometimes records are outdated," she began. "Sometimes patients have multiple entries. Sometimes—" She stopped, then continued slower. "Sometimes people misrepresent their marital status for insurance, benefits, or personal reasons." Personal reasons. My stomach twisted. "So what now?" I asked. Heather nodded once, professional. "We escalate to registration and legal. We update his chart. We document this certificate. Then we proceed." "How long?" I demanded. Heather's mouth tightened. "Minutes," she promised, and for once I believed her because her eyes looked angry too. While Heather made calls, I sat in that room and replayed the name Caroline like it was an infection. How long? How deep? How did you put another woman into a hospital chart as your spouse while living in a house with me and our son? Then the door opened and a woman walked in who made my entire body go rigid. Not because she was loud, because she looked like someone who expected to be obeyed. Mid-40s, perfect hair, tailored coat, jewelry that said money without screaming it. She held a purse like a weapon, and she smiled at me like I was a staff member in her way. "I'm Caroline Ellis," she said. "Where is my husband?" I stood up slowly. "Your husband?" I repeated. Caroline's smile tightened. "Grant, they called me. He had a stroke." She looked around the room as if searching for a nurse to dismiss. "I need to sign whatever they need." Heather stepped between us slightly. "Ma'am," Heather said, "we're verifying next of kin status." Caroline turned her gaze onto Heather with annoyance. "Verify?" she repeated. "I'm his wife. It's in the chart." Then she looked back at me, and her expression sharpened. "And who are you?" I felt something go perfectly still inside me. "I'm Nadia," I said. "I'm his wife." Caroline laughed once, small and incredulous. "No," she said. You're the one in the house." The one in the house. Like I was furniture. Like I was a location. My hands curled into fists. "We have a son," I said quietly. Caroline's smile didn't move. "That doesn't make you his wife," she replied, too smooth. Heather held up a hand. "We have documentation," she said. "A marriage certificate." Caroline's eyes flicked toward Heather's phone. For a split second, something like panic flashed across her face. Then she recovered and said, "That's impossible. We're married." "To Grant?" I asked, and my voice shook now with rage. "Yes," she snapped. "We never divorced." That sentence hit like a hammer. Never divorced. Then how did he marry me? I demanded. Caroline's eyes hardened. Ask him, she said. If he wakes up. Heather's voice cut in, firm. Ma'am, do you have proof of marriage? Caroline's chin lifted. It's on file, that should be enough. Heather didn't blink. Not if there's conflicting documentation. Do you have a certificate? Caroline hesitated. Not with me. Heather nodded as if she expected that. Then at this time we will proceed with the documentation we have. If you provide additional proof, legal will review. Caroline stared at Heather, then at me, and her voice dropped into something colder. You have no idea what you're involved in, she said. I met her gaze. Neither do you, I said, because if he never divorced you, then he committed fraud on one of us. Caroline's lips pressed together. She didn't deny it. She didn't look surprised. She looked annoyed, like she had known the structure was unstable and expected it to hold anyway. Heather left to update the chart. A nurse came in and said they were proceeding with the procedure under emergency consent and updated spouse documentation. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt sick, because while doctors fought to save Grant's brain, I was learning my marriage might not even exist in the eyes of the law. Caroline waited in the hall like she owned the building. I sat in the waiting room like my blood had been replaced with ice. 2 hours later, the surgeon came out and said the procedure was successful, pressure relieved, critical but stable. I nodded, cried once, then wiped my face because crying felt like letting the wrong person win. Caroline stepped forward immediately. Can I see him? She demanded. The surgeon looked at the chart, then at Heather, then back at Caroline. Family only, he said carefully. Heather's voice was polite but firm. At this time, visitation is limited to documented spouse and child. Caroline's eyes snapped to me like knives. This isn't over, she said. Then she walked away down the corridor, heels clicking like punctuation. The next day, while Grant slept under sedation, Heather sat with me and explained what she'd found with the hospital's legal team. Grant had 2 patient profiles in the system, one older, created years ago in another county. That one listed Caroline Ellis as spouse and emergency contact. It had been merged incorrectly when the ambulance transferred him. The newer profile, mine, had me listed as spouse, but because the old record contained a verified spouse flag, the system defaulted to Caroline when it auto-called next of kin. That's how Caroline got the call. That's how she arrived. That's how, for an hour, the hospital treated me like I was pretending. But the deeper problem was this. The legal team ran a quick county record search. There was a marriage license for Grant Ellis and Caroline Pierce, Caroline's maiden name, filed 14 years ago. There was no divorce recorded under that county, no dissolution, no annulment, nothing. My hands went numb. So, I whispered, I'm not legally married. Heather's face softened. I can't give legal advice, she said. But based on what we found, your marriage may be invalid until a court resolves his marital status. Invalid. Like my son's existence was a clerical error. Like 12 years of holidays and surgeries and hard times and inside jokes and building a life meant nothing because one document was missing in a courthouse file. I went to the hospital chapel and sat alone for 10 minutes with my hands locked together until my knuckles hurt. Then I did the only thing that felt solid. I started building a record. I called my sister and asked her to pull every document we had, our marriage certificate copy, tax returns filed jointly, insurance policies, our son's birth certificate, mortgage, bank accounts, everything. Not because it would magically produce a divorce decree, but because if Grant had built 2 lives, I was going to make sure mine had paper. When Grant woke up 2 days later, he was groggy, confused, and weak. His speech was slurred. His eyes drifted. But when I said his name, he focused enough to look at me like he recognized the danger in my face. Nadia, he whispered. What happened? I leaned in close so my voice would not carry. The nurse said I'm not your wife, I said. Caroline came. She says you never divorced her. Grant's eyes shut for a long second like pain. Then he opened them and tried to turn his head away. I didn't think she'd ever show up, he murmured. That sentence burned. "So it's true," I said. "You never divorced her." His throat worked. "It was complicated," he whispered. "I was young. She had connections, money, lawyers. And you married me anyway," I said, and my voice stayed low only because the monitors would record a spike if I screamed. Grant's eyes filled with tears he didn't let fall. "I loved you," he said. "I do love you." "Love doesn't make paperwork disappear," I said. "Did you commit bigamy?" He flinched at the word. Then he whispered, "I tried to file. She blocked it. She never signed." Then I moved. I thought enough time passed. Enough time passed. Like legality expires, like vows age out. "You let me change my name," I said. "You let me have a child with you." Grant swallowed. "I didn't want to lose you," he whispered. And in that moment, the tragedy of it became clear. He hadn't married me because he believed he could build something real. He married me because he believed he could outrun the consequences of the first marriage. I left the room without yelling. I left because if I stayed, I would break something that couldn't be unbroken. In the hallway, Heather was waiting, like she'd been expecting the moment the truth hit my face. "He admitted it," I said. Heather nodded once. "Then you need legal counsel," she replied. I did. Fast. Not because I wanted revenge, but because my son's stability had just been placed on a fault line created by a man who thought complicated was a substitute for resolved. The lawyer explained what Grant's confession meant. If Grant's first marriage was still valid, my marriage could be voidable or void, depending on jurisdiction, and that could affect property, inheritance, medical decision-making, everything. But it didn't erase my son. It didn't erase child support. It didn't erase fraud. It did, however, open a door for Caroline to claim rights she had apparently been waiting to reclaim, which explained why she had stood in that corridor like she owned the air. A week later, Caroline returned, with paperwork. Not a marriage certificate. Something else. A power of attorney filed years ago granting her healthcare decision-making authority if Grant was incapacitated. The hospital legal team rejected it because it was outdated and because Grant was now awake and competent enough to revoke it verbally with witnesses. When the attorney told Caroline she couldn't override Grant's stated wishes, Caroline's composure finally cracked, not into tears, into anger. "He belongs to me," she said, loud enough that nurses looked up. That was the moment I stopped seeing her as just the other woman in a record. She wasn't the other woman. She was the first woman, the one Grant never escaped, and she had never stopped believing he was hers. Grant signed the revocation. He chose me for visitation. He chose our son for priority. He chose finally to confront the thing he had avoided. But choices made after a stroke don't erase the years before it. Once Grant was discharged, he moved into a rehab facility. Not home, not my house, because my house stopped feeling like ours the moment a nurse whispered I wasn't his wife. My lawyer filed for a declaratory judgment and a protective order regarding the power of attorney threats Caroline started making through emails. Grant's lawyer, yes, he needed one too, initiated divorce proceedings from Caroline immediately. Caroline fought it, of course. People like her don't lose quietly. She filed motions, contested jurisdiction, tried to drag me into it as an interested party, called me the girlfriend in one filing like she could erase 12 years with one word. The judge didn't like that. Judges rarely like arrogant. 3 months later, in a family court hearing room that smelled like old carpet and consequence, Caroline sat at one table with an attorney and perfect lipstick. Grant sat at another looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, and I sat behind my lawyer with our son's birth certificate in a folder like armor. The judge reviewed the timeline, the records, the lack of divorce, the second marriage, the child, the power of attorney maneuver, and then said the sentence that finally made Caroline's face change for real. "Mr. Ellis," the judge said, "you may have committed bigamy. That is not a complicated mistake. That is a crime." Caroline's attorney started to speak. The judge held up a hand. "And Mrs. Ellis, Caroline," she corrected, Your attempt to use a decade-old power of attorney to seize medical control after years of separation suggests bad faith. Bad faith. That phrase sounded like a door locking. The judge granted an expedited divorce from Caroline, ordered a fraud referral for review, and issued temporary orders protecting my access as the mother of Grant's minor child and primary caregiver. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was paperwork and consequences and the slow rebuild of what Grant broke. Grant eventually apologized in a way that sounded real. Not, "I'm sorry you found out," not, "I didn't mean for it to happen like this." A real apology. "I lied because I was afraid, and I used you to hide from my past." I didn't forgive him quickly. I didn't make speeches. I focused on my son, on stability, on keeping our home quiet, on learning that love without truth is just a trap you decorate together. The nurse who whispered to me in that hallway never knew what she started. She never knew that her pause, her careful voice, her refusal to let me sign without certainty forced a hidden marriage into the light at the exact moment Grant's life depended on honesty. But I think about her often. Because that's the thing about systems. Sometimes they fail you. Sometimes they save you. And sometimes one person inside the system notices the wrong name on a chart and chooses to whisper the truth before the lie becomes irreversible. If she hadn't, I would have signed. I would have been used as wife on paper one more time in a story where I wasn't legally anything at all. And I would have found out later in probate or custody court when the stakes were even worse. Instead, I found out in a hospital corridor with fluorescent lights and a consent form and a nurse's pen hovering in the air. "Ma'am, you're not his wife." That whisper didn't just change my day. It changed my life.